The Pacific stretched endlessly, an expanse of deep blue flecked with whitecaps that glimmered beneath the morning sun. On the horizon, nothing but water. Above it, the sky was a vast dome of pale gold, the kind of clean, unbroken canvas that seemed made for flight. At the center of this vastness lay the carrier, a floating city of steel bristling with power, its deck a battlefield of organized chaos. From the first light of dawn, the deck had been alive. Sailors in color-coded jerseys green, purple, red, yellow moved like parts of a living machine, each performing their role with practiced urgency. The smell of jet fuel hung thick in the air, blending with the salt of the sea and the faint tang of grease that clung to the ship's metal bones. Engines roared as fighters were pulled into position. Crewmen guided them forward with sweeping arm motions, every signal precise, every movement synchronized with a deafening ballet of launch preparations. The carrier was alive with noise hydraulics hissing, turbines whirring, boots pounding against steel. Radios crackled with clipped commands. For those unaccustomed to the rhythm of a carrier, it could be overwhelming, almost chaotic. For the crew, it was order disguised as madness. Overhead, a pair of F-22 Raptors tore across the sky in tight formation, their engines screaming as they sliced the air. Sunlight glanced off their sleek fuselages, making them appear like silver blades streaking through the morning haze. Their arrival had drawn eyes upward, even among the most seasoned sailors. Raptors belonged to the Air Force, not the Navy, and seeing them soar above a carrier was unusual, enough to spark curiosity and unease. But the real tension on deck wasn't about the Raptors. It was about her. Whispers had been circulating since the night before, spreading from ready rooms to mess halls, from junior sailors to hardened chiefs. Someone was flying today who hadn't been seen in years. A pilot whose name had been spoken like a story, not a reality. A call sign that had lived longer in memory than on comms. Valkyrie. For the young crew, it was little more than a nickname passed down with exaggeration. Legends always grew in the telling. They'd heard fragments dogfights won against impossible odds, simulated kills racked up against entire squadrons, maneuvers that baffled instructors. But stories could be inflated. Stories could lie. The veterans didn't laugh. They didn't even speak much about it, except in clipped words and knowing glances. To them, Valkyrie was not a myth. She was a pilot who had once flown among them, who had turned training into combat art. She had left the service years ago, her departure quiet, her legend louder than her exit. Now she was returning for one more flight, and no one knew exactly why. That question hung in the air heavier than the exhaust. Why her? Why now? On the carrier's bridge, officers leaned over their charts and screens, their clipped discussions betraying both anticipation and discomfort. Officially, today was nothing more than a joint exercise, an opportunity for Air Force Raptors to test Navy pilots in simulated combat. Unofficially, it was a stage being set, and every officer knew the audience extended beyond the carrier. Somewhere, higher commands were watching, waiting to see whether one pilot could still live up to her own myth. Down on the deck, the sailors carried on their tasks, but the tension leaked into their movements. Conversations were short, eyes occasionally drifting toward the hangar where her jet waited. They didn't need to see her yet. The idea of her was already heavy enough. The Raptors seemed to sense it too, though in a different way. Overhead, they dove and banked in showy arcs, their confidence radiating through the comms as they checked in with controllers. In their ready rooms earlier, they had laughed, confident and almost dismissive. They'd mocked the whispers about an older pilot returning to the cockpit, betting on who would be the first to score the simulated kill. They were the best of the best, hand-picked for this exercise, their reputations burnished by years of dominance in air combat training. To them, Valkyrie was a ghost, a story their instructors had inflated, a cautionary tale to make rookies humble. They believed the past had no place in their skies. But the veterans knew better. On the deck, a chief petty officer, face, weathered by years of salt air and sun, stood with his arms crossed, watching the Raptors slice overhead. A younger sailor beside him smirked. "Pretty birds, huh, Chief? Bet they'll put her down quick." The chief didn't answer right away. He spat over the side of the deck, eyes still on the sky. "You've never seen her fly," he said. Finally, voice flat but weighted. "Pray you never have to face her in the air." The sailor frowned, not sure if it was warning or exaggeration. But the chief said no more. He didn't need to. Minutes stretched. Preparations continued. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the deck into a furnace of light and heat. And then it happened. The hangar doors opened. From the shadows, ground crews rolled her jet forward sleek, polished, painted with the sharp insignia of her squadron. The jet looked no different from any other, but the reaction it stirred was unmistakable. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The weight of expectation pulled at every eye. And then she appeared. Helmet tucked beneath her arm, visor reflecting the sun, her stride was unhurried yet commanding. She didn't look around for acknowledgement, didn't seek the eyes trained on her. She walked with the calm of someone who had done this too many times to need reassurance. Her flight suit wore the marks of long service, her patches faded yet unmistakable. Across her chest plate, in bold, stenciled letters, rested her call sign. Valkyrie. The word rippled across the deck in hushed whispers, as though speaking it too loudly might break the moment. The young crew stared, seeing at last the flesh and blood woman behind the stories. Veterans simply watched, their expressions unreadable, but heavy with memory. She reached the jet, handed her helmet to the crew chief, and began pre-flight checks with quiet efficiency. No wasted movement, no hesitation. Every switch she touched, every glance she gave, carried the confidence of someone who didn't need to think about what came next. Above, the Raptors circled, their confidence still unbroken, but for the first time, their chatter had thinned. They were watching too. On the bridge, the commander leaned against the glass, his jaw set. "And so it begins," he muttered. The deck roared louder as Valkyrie climbed into the cockpit, sealing herself in with the machine that had made her legend. For a heartbeat, the carrier seemed to hold its breath. Engines fired. The jet trembled. The catapult hissed as cables locked in place. And then, with a thunderous crack, Valkyrie was launched into the endless blue. The exercise had begun. And though the Raptors didn't know it yet, the skies above the Pacific were about to become her battlefield once more. High above the carrier, the Raptors cut arcs across the Pacific sky like predators testing their wings. Each maneuver carried a streak of confidence, tight rolls, blistering climbs, sharp dives. They weren't just patrolling. They were performing. Down below, sailors shaded their eyes, watching the streaks of silver move with ease, their engines thundering like distant storms. The Raptors belonged to the Air Force, and everyone knew they weren't here for a routine patrol. They had been brought in for one purpose: to challenge, to dominate, to prove that even the Navy's most respected pilots could be humbled. Inside their cockpits, the pilots radiated the same confidence as their jets. They were young, sharp, hand-picked for their skill and aggression. Most had spent their careers mastering simulations, exercises, and war games designed to pit the best against the best. These weren't average pilots. They were champions of their schools, tacticians, who had beaten nearly every opponent thrown their way. In the ready rooms earlier, their banter had been electric. "Who's taking her first?" one had asked, grinning as he strapped into his flight suit. "Depends if she can even keep up," Another laughed, tossing his helmet onto the table. I'll give her 2 minutes before she's painted. She's old school, said a third, tightening his gloves. Stories about her are just that, stories. This isn't 20 years ago. We're flying Raptors, not antiques. The room had filled with chuckles. To them, Valkyrie was a name, not a threat. They'd heard whispers about her reputation, but reputations didn't win fights. Technology did. Training did. Youth did. And they had all three. The Raptors were machines born for dominance. With stealth capabilities that made radar nearly useless, with thrust vectoring engines that allowed turns few aircraft could match, and with avionics so advanced they bordered on science fiction, the Raptors were apex predators of the sky. The pilots sitting in their cockpits knew this with unshakable certainty. They didn't just fly the Raptors, they embodied them. Down on the carrier, sailors watching from below could sense that cockiness, even without hearing their chatter. The Raptors' maneuvers were sharper than they needed to be, showier than the exercise required. Their pilots wanted to prove something before the fight even began. But there was a difference between confidence and arrogance, and some of the older officers on the bridge recognized it instantly. They had seen this before young pilots, convinced that the world bent to their skill, only to learn that experience could bend the world right back. Commander Harris, a graying officer who had spent decades watching exercises rise and fall, leaned against the railing as the Raptors streaked by. His second, a lieutenant with far less gray and far more certainty, smirked. They'll run circles around her, the lieutenant said. This isn't her era anymore. She's walking into a slaughter. Harris didn't answer immediately. His eyes followed the Raptors as they roared overhead, the sun glinting off their wings. He had heard similar words years ago, words spoken before exercises that ended in stunned silence. You ever seen her fly? Harris asked at last. The lieutenant shook his head. No, sir. Just heard the stories. But stories aren't tactics. Harris's lips curved, not quite a smile. Stories don't survive this long without truth in them. The lieutenant frowned, but Harris said nothing more. Above, the Raptors regrouped, forming a diamond as they swept over the carrier. Their radios buzzed with quick chatter. Targets confirmed. Radar sweep clean. Control, we've got eyes on the exercise field. Their voices carried an ease that betrayed no hint of nerves. To them, this was a game already won. One of the youngest, a lieutenant barely into his 20s, spoke with a smirk audible even through the static. This Valkyrie, what's she flying again? Super Hornet? Legacy bird? Yeah, another chuckled. She'd be dead in the water before she even gets a lock. These old-timers don't know what it's like to fight 5th gen. 5th gen. Doesn't matter if she can't keep up, the first pilot said. We'll box her in, split her blind, and it's over. The others laughed, their voices overlapping in confidence. But beneath their bravado, a current of curiosity lingered. They knew her name. They had heard it in classrooms, whispered by instructors who rarely praised anyone. Valkyrie. Her reputation had outlived her career, carried down like folklore. Some of them wondered, pridedly, if the stories had merit. But in the sky, doubts rarely survived long. Confidence always won out until it didn't. On the carrier's flight deck, the sailors kept working, but the mood had shifted. Every set of eyes seemed drawn upward, not at the Raptors, but toward the hangar where Valkyrie's jet had been rolled into the light. They were watching two worlds converge, the present, loud and brash, and the past, quiet and heavy. In one ready room, an older Navy pilot leaned against the wall, listening to the Raptors' chatter filtering through the comms. His jaw tightened. They don't know what they're walking into, he said softly. Beside him, a younger aviator raised an eyebrow. They're Raptors, sir. They'll handle it. The older man didn't argue. He simply closed his eyes, remembering a time when he, too, had underestimated her. He remembered the sting of realizing that skill wasn't measured in years, but in instinct. And Valkyrie's instincts had once been unmatched. The Raptors continued their maneuvers, painting the sky with trails of power. To the untrained eye, they looked invincible. To the veterans watching below, they looked too sure, too eager, too blind. When Valkyrie launched, they would discover the truth for themselves. For now, they laughed, confident in their machines and their youth. They believed the exercise belonged to them. But legends didn't survive on stories alone. Legends survived because time and again they proved the present wrong. And in less than an hour, the Challenger Squadron would learn why Valkyrie was not a name spoken lightly. The hangar bay groaned open with a hydraulic hiss, spilling sunlight across steel that gleamed with oil and polish. Crew members scrambled, guiding her jet forward with hand signals, their vests flashing bright against the shadowed walls. The aircraft looked no different from any other, its matte gray frame catching the light in sharp angles. Yet as soon as it appeared, the air seemed to change. It wasn't the jet itself, it was the expectation it carried. Whispers moved along the deck like a current, sailors nudging each other, eyes widening as if a myth had stepped into reality. Then she appeared, helmet tucked beneath one arm, her other gloved hand resting lightly on the strap of her flight bag. She walked out of the hangar with steady strides, no hesitation, no glance at the crowd she knew was watching. She didn't need to look. She could feel them. Sailors froze in place for half a heartbeat, their tasks briefly forgotten. Officers on the deck turned their heads. Even those in the control tower craned for a glimpse. Her flight suit was worn, the fabric softened by years of service, yet meticulously maintained. The patches sewn into it were faded, their colors dulled by time, but the stories behind them remained sharp in memory. On her chest plate, printed in bold letters, was the word that had sparked anticipation for days. Valkyrie. The name spread across the deck in murmurs. Younger sailors repeated it under their breath, as though testing how it felt to say. Veterans didn't repeat it. They simply watched, silent, knowing too well what that call sign represented. She walked with the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove, yet everything still to protect. Each step carried an ease that came only from years of repetition, of muscle memory burned deep. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't posturing. She simply moved with quiet authority, and that, more than any swagger, commanded attention. A group of young sailors clustered near the catapult track whispered fiercely among themselves. "That's her?" one asked, squinting. "Doesn't look like much," another muttered. The oldest of the group, a petty officer with salt creeping into his hair, shook his head. "You don't need to look like much if you fly like her." Their conversation trailed off as Valkyrie approached her aircraft. The jet stood waiting, nose pointed toward the deck's edge, wings gleaming in the sunlight. A crew chief in green stepped forward, saluted, and handed her the checklist. She acknowledged him with a nod, her eyes already scanning the machine. The ritual began, smooth and practiced. She moved with precision, checking control surfaces, inspecting the undercarriage, running her gloved fingers along edges only she seemed to care about. To an outsider, it looked like routine. To those who understood, it was artistry. She wasn't just checking a machine. She was reacquainting herself with a partner. Above, the Raptors swooped low in formation, their engines thunderous enough to rattle the deck. They were putting on a show, a reminder of dominance. Valkyrie didn't look up. She didn't acknowledge them at all. To her, they were noise, background, nothing more. The crew chief watched her work, his expression caught between awe and reverence. "Ma'am," he said softly as she finished the final check, "good to have you back." She gave him the faintest smile, one corner of her mouth twitching upward. Good to be back. Then she slid her helmet on, sealing herself inside the visor's reflection. Her world shifted. The noise of the deck muffled. The chatter of sailors dulled. All that remained was the machine beneath her hands and the sky above her head. Inside the cockpit, switches flipped beneath her touch. Lights blinked alive, displays glowed, and the jet shuddered as engines roared awake. The sound rolled across the deck like thunder, rattling steel plates beneath sailors' boots. Heads turned, eyes locked on the aircraft as heat shimmered from its exhaust. On the bridge, Commander Harris leaned forward, hands clasped behind his back. His second officer stood beside him, eyes wide. "She's really flying again," the younger man muttered. "She never stopped," Harris replied quietly. "The sky doesn't forget someone like her." Down below, the deck crew moved with urgency, attaching the jet to the catapult. Signals were exchanged, cables locked, and the crew cleared the lane. Valkyrie ran through her final checks, voice calm as she called out confirmations. Her tone carried no excitement, no nerves. Just precision. Control surfaces green. Fuel at full. Systems check complete. She leaned back, gripping the throttle with steady hands. The shooter crouched low, checking for final clearance, then spun his arm in the practice gesture that sent adrenaline surging through. Every sailor watching. Valkyrie's engines screamed higher, the jet trembling with contained fury. Steam hissed from the catapult track. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single line of tension. The jet, the deck, the ocean waiting below. Then the shooter dropped to one knee, pointed forward, and Valkyrie was unleashed. The catapult slammed her into the sky with a violent lurch, her jet streaking down the deck and lifting off the edge in a blast of thunder. Heat rippled in her wake, salt spray exploding below as the machine clawed upward into open blue. Cheers erupted across the deck. Sailors pumped fists, shouted her name, or simply stood in stunned silence. Above, the Raptors wheeled around, their chatter sharp in the comms. They had seen her launch. Now the game would begin. In her cockpit, Valkyrie said nothing. The world around her stretched into horizon and light, her jet humming beneath her. Touch like a living thing. For the first time in years, she was back where she belonged, and she felt nothing but calm. The storm was yet to come. The jet rocketed into the morning, vapor trailing as Valkyrie pulled skyward. Below, the carrier shrank into a toy-sized fortress in the Pacific. The deck that had been a furnace of noise became a faint hum against the roar of her engines. Above, nothing but boundless blue, punctuated by the distant shimmer of silver wings moving in formation. The Raptors were waiting. They came into view in a sweeping arc, sunlight glinting off their angular frames. 5 of them. Predators circling, their sleek fuselages cutting lines across the horizon like sharks cruising a reef. Their engines thundered, a sound that reverberated in her chest, even through layers of steel and insulation. They spread wide, boxing her in with a confidence that was nearly theatrical. It wasn't just tactics, it was intimidation, a show of dominance meant for the observers watching far below. On the bridge of the carrier, officers leaned forward over radar screens. Green dots pulsed and shifted across digital seas. There, trails painting the developing picture. Radios crackled with updates, clipped voices fighting to mask their tension. Valkyrie airborne, bearing east. Raptor formation holding at 2 o'clock, altitude climbing. "They're moving to surround." Commander Harris said nothing. He stood with arms crossed, gaze fixed on the horizon as though he could see beyond steel and glass. His younger lieutenant shifted uneasily beside him. "They're toying with her," the lieutenant said, 5 against 1. "She doesn't stand a chance." Harris's jaw tightened. "You've never seen her in the air." The lieutenant frowned, but said no more. Above, Valkyrie scanned her displays, every movement smooth, unhurried. Blips marked the Raptors closing in, their signatures faint, but unmistakable. She could sense their presence even without the screens, the way the sky seemed to press in, the way space itself felt smaller when predators drew near. Her hand rested lightly on the throttle. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. She let them come. Inside their cockpits, the Raptor pilots carried the same cockiness they'd flaunted on the deck. Their voices filled the comms with easy laughter and confident predictions. Target acquired. She's boxed. Control, this won't take long. Copy that, moving to intercept. They shifted into position with precision drilled into them through years of training. One climbed above her, blocking the sun with his silhouette. Two slid wide on her flanks. The last two hung just behind, their presence heavy in her mirrors. From the outside, it looked flawless. 5 against 1, a net tightening around prey. On the deck below, sailors shaded their eyes, watching the formation take shape. The younger ones whispered predictions. She's not even moving. They'll take her in seconds. Raptors don't lose. The veterans said nothing. They'd seen this before. The silence that gripped them wasn't doubt. It was anticipation. Valkyrie's breathing was steady, controlled. The hum of her engines was constant, a rhythm that settled into her bones. She adjusted her grip on the stick, her eyes flicking between horizon and display. Her heart wasn't racing. It never did, not up here. The sky was her domain, and fear had no place in it. The Raptors tightened the circle. Their leader's voice came sharp and sure. Control, visual confirmation. Target boxed. The controller's reply was clipped. Roger, engage at will. The trap closed, and Valkyrie moved. It wasn't a dramatic surge. Not yet. She tilted her jet into a shallow climb, easing into the space between them as though testing the water. The Raptors adjusted instantly, their formation contracting to cut off the gap. To them, it looked like hesitation. To her, it was measurement. She was feeling the air, the rhythm of their movements, the patterns they didn't know they revealed. From the bridge, the younger lieutenant smirked. She's stalling. Harris shook his head slowly. She's reading them. Above, Valkyrie's jet glinted in the sun, caught in the middle of a cage of raptors. For a moment, it looked like the end of the story before it had even begun. 5 sleek predators, 1 lone fighter. Technology, youth, numbers all weighed against her. But inside her cockpit, Valkyrie's lips curled into the faintest smile. Not arrogance. Not defiance. Recognition. She had seen this before, years ago, in skies just as blue, with opponents just as sure of themselves. And she had broken them, one by one. The Raptor leader's voice came over the comms, steady but smug. Valkyrie, you're boxed. Best call it early before this gets ugly. Her response was calm, almost detached. Copy. A pause hung in the air, thick enough to still the chatter in the other cockpits. Then her voice returned, sharper now, her call sign cutting through the comms like a blade. Valkyrie, maneuvering. Her jet rolled left, sudden and sharp, the sun flashing across her fuselage. In an instant, the cage wasn't a trap. It was a puzzle she'd just begun to solve. The Raptors reacted, engines roaring as they shifted to close the gap. Their chatter spiked with sudden urgency. She's breaking left. Cut her off. Stay tight. Don't let her out. But for the first time, there was hesitation in their voices. On the carrier below, sailors leaned forward, eyes wide. The veterans didn't move. They'd known this moment was coming. The exercise had only just begun, but the shift was unmistakable. The Raptors weren't hunting prey anymore. They were facing Valkyrie. The sky crackled with tension. Valkyrie's jet rolled out of the sun, banking sharply across the Pacific's endless horizon. The Raptors responded instantly, their formation tightening, their engines screaming as they dove to intercept. It was 5 against 1, and to the untrained eye, it looked inevitable. On the carrier deck below, sailors clutched binoculars, shielding their eyes from the glare. From the bridge, officers leaned toward radar screens, watching green blips converge. The younger lieutenant smirked again, confident in the outcome. She's boxed. No way out now. Commander Harris didn't answer. He was waiting. Then her voice cut through the comms. Calm, steady, measured. Valkyrie airborne. 3 words. That was all. In the cockpits of the Raptors, the chatter ceased. The confident jokes that had filled the air only minutes ago died mid-sentence. Static hummed where laughter had been. Every pilot had heard the name before, sometimes whispered in classrooms, sometimes spoken with reverence in hangars late at night. They'd dismissed the stories as inflated relics of another generation. But hearing the name in real time, not in rumor, not in a story, was something else entirely. It was like a ghost stepping onto the battlefield, a legend becoming flesh. The youngest pilot, barely into his 20s, felt a chill crawl down his spine despite the cocoon of his cockpit. His fingers tightened on the stick. He tried to shake it off, tried to remind himself of what he flew, what he had trained for. He was in a Raptor, the most advanced fighter on Earth. She was flying an older bird, a relic. Logic told him he should have the advantage. But logic didn't erase the weight of that call sign pressing into his ears. Valkyrie. The leader of the Raptors, Captain Reynolds, swallowed hard. He'd flown hundreds of sorties, trained under some of the best instructors. Alive, and thought he'd left behind the awe of legends years ago. But even he felt it, the quiet recognition that he was facing someone whose reputation had survived, not through exaggeration, but through consistency. Pilots didn't tell stories about luck. They told stories about inevitability. And Valkyrie had been inevitable. For a long moment, no one spoke. 5 jets streaked through the sky in silence, their formation still tight, their power still overwhelming. But the silence itself became a presence, louder than any roar of engines. On the bridge, the younger lieutenant tilted his head. Why? Aren't they engaging? They've got her pinned. Harris exhaled slowly, eyes never leaving the horizon. Because they just realized who they're fighting. The lieutenant blinked, confused. She's just another pilot. She's not. Harris interrupted sharply. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen things the lieutenant hadn't. Someone who understood that skill was more than technology. Not up there. Above, Valkyrie's jet climbed, the sun washing across her canopy. Her movements were smooth, controlled, unhurried. She didn't lunge for an escape. She didn't flinch at their overwhelming presence. She simply flew with the ease of someone utterly at home. Her voice returned to the comms, calm as a whisper, yet cutting through every cockpit with razor clarity. Raptors, confirm exercise rules. There was a pause. The Raptors' leader keyed his mic, his tone more formal now, stripped of arrogance. Weapons simulation active. Guns and missiles online. No live fire. Copy. Her acknowledgement was crisp, professional, but beneath it was something colder. To the Raptors, it sounded less like protocol and more like permission. The youngest pilot's pulse quickened. He remembered a story his instructor once told about Valkyrie, how she had dismantled a squadron during a training exercise by predicting their moves before they even made them. The instructor had laughed when students dismissed it, saying, "You'll believe it when you see it." Now he was seeing it. The Raptors' silence deepened. Each pilot gripped their controls tighter, their minds racing with unspoken questions. Who would move first? Could they still box her in? Or had the fight already shifted the moment she said her name? Down on the carrier, the deck crew sensed it too. Conversations quieted. Even those who didn't understand tactics could feel the difference. The exercise no longer looked like predators circling prey. It looked like predators realizing the prey had teeth. Valkyrie angled her jet upward slightly, her tone flat but edged when she spoke again. Valkyrie maneuvering. Her call sign was no longer just a word. It was a commandment, a warning, a memory reawakened. The Raptor's formation wavered, not visibly to the naked eye, but enough for trained observers to notice. Slight hesitations, slight delays, pilots second-guessing. The youngest whispered into his mic, almost without realizing it. "She's reading us." No one answered him. The silence stretched longer, heavier. Engines thundered across the sky, contrails spiraled behind wings, but no pilot dared speak. Every word felt unnecessary, even dangerous, as though breaking the silence would somehow make them more vulnerable. Valkyrie's jet tilted again, a movement so smooth it seemed effortless. She wasn't just maneuvering, she was probing, pushing at their nerves, forcing them to reveal themselves without firing a shot. On the bridge, Harris allowed himself the faintest smile. He recognized the game. He'd seen it before, years ago, when she'd flown against overwhelming odds and turned the sky into a classroom. She wasn't just fighting the Raptors. She was teaching them. And the first lesson was silence. The Raptors had entered the sky with laughter and confidence, their voices sharp with arrogance. Now, under the weight of a call sign that refused to die, they were quiet. Not disciplined silence. Not tactical silence. Fear silence. Respect silence. The kind of silence that comes when you realize the stories you mocked weren't exaggerated. They were warnings. Above the Pacific, 5 Raptors and 1 lone jet cut trails across the horizon, locked in a standoff that felt like the calm before. A storm. But the storm had already begun, even if the Raptors didn't understand it yet, because Valkyrie had spoken her name, and the sky had listened. The sky was a frozen theater. Valkyrie's call sign still echoed in the minds of the Raptor pilots, a ghost riding the coms, heavy enough to silence 5 cockpits. Contrails laced the horizon as their formation held, boxing her in on every side. To the untrained eye, it was checkmate. But inside those cockpits, doubt gnawed. No one moved. The youngest pilot fought the urge to glance at his wingman. His palms were slick inside his gloves. He had practiced hundreds of intercept drills, trained in simulators that mimicked impossible scenarios, yet nothing had prepared him for stillness. This thick, this suffocating. It wasn't silence like discipline. It was silence like fear. Valkyrie let it hang. She wanted them to stew in it, to feel their confidence unraveling thread by thread. Her fingers rested lightly on the throttle. Her breathing was calm, steady, as though she had all the time in the world. Then she moved. It was subtle at first, a sudden roll into the sun. Her jet tilted hard left, banking into the glare, her fuselage cutting across golden rays like a blade. For a fraction of a second, her jet disappeared into light, and the Raptors lost sight of her. Visual lost, one pilot blurted before biting down on his mic. In that heartbeat of blindness, she broke the circle. She dove low, engines howling, cutting across the Raptor's carefully drawn net like it was paper. The formation faltered, Raptors scrambling to reorient. What had been a perfect box became an awkward chase. Southwest vector pursue. Captain Reynolds barked, his voice steadier than he felt. The Raptors dove, engines screaming as they cut through the air. Contrails twisted behind them, 5 sleek hunters trying to reassert dominance. But Valkyrie wasn't running. She was dictating. Her jet leveled low, skimming the edge of the clouds, forcing the Raptors to follow into tighter, riskier air. She knew exactly what she was doing. The Raptors had the technology, but she had the rhythm of the sky. The youngest pilot clenched his jaw. He locked onto her heat signature, thumb hovering over the trigger for the simulated missile. The computer gave him the tone target acquired. For a brief second, adrenaline surged. He fired. A digital chime rang in his headset. Kill confirmed. Relief burst inside his chest until Valkyrie's voice cut through. Check your 6. The pilot's breath caught. He glanced back. His display screamed a warning. Valkyries. Jet wasn't in front of him anymore. It was behind him. His eyes widened, disbelief punching the air out of his lungs. How? He had her locked. He had the tone. But she was there, riding his tail, her simulated cannons lighting his screen with an unmistakable kill signal. Raptor 4 guns. Dead. Her voice was flat, clinical, not gloating. Just fact. The youngest. Pilot's chest tightened. His hands trembled as he yanked his stick, breaking hard to escape, but it didn't matter. In the exercise, he was already down. He could only peel off, humiliated, watching the horizon blur. On the carrier deck below, a collective gasp rose from the sailors. The green dot representing Raptor 4 blinked red on the radar screens. The younger lieutenant's mouth fell open. She killed him. In seconds, Harris didn't look away from the horizon. No, she taught him. Above, the Raptors tightened ranks, shaken but not broken. 4 jets remained, their formation. Roughened by the loss of one, their breathing harsher in their helmets. Stay sharp, Reynolds ordered, though his own nerves betrayed him. She's fast, but we can corner her. Valkyrie climbed again, looping back into the sun. The move was old school, textbook even, but the way she executed made it lethal. She vanished into blinding light, forcing the Raptors to guess. Visual lost again. Another pilot snapped. Spread wide. Don't bunch. But spreading wide was exactly what she wanted. The moment they broke formation, she struck. Diving from the glare, she sliced between them, her fuselage screaming through turbulent air. Her guns lit up the simulation again. Raptor 2 guns. Dead. A pilot cursed, slamming his fist against the canopy. 2 down. The balance shifted. What had been overwhelming odds was now 4 against 1. And the one wasn't retreating. She was advancing. On the carrier, the younger sailors erupted in noise shouts of disbelief, whoops of excitement, nervous laughter. Even those who didn't fully understand what they were watching could feel the momentum turning. The veterans nodded grimly. They had expected this. In the bridge, Harris's lips curved into the faintest smile. Classic Valkyrie. Reynolds gritted his teeth, sweat beading under his helmet. He pushed his Raptor harder, rolling into a climb to cut her off. Stay tight. Don't let her isolate us. But Valkyrie thrived on isolation. She dragged them higher, climbing into thinner air where jets strained under the pressure. The Raptors followed, engines roaring, but she maneuvered with a grace that seemed impossible. Every move she made forced them to burn energy faster, forced them to fight on her terms. Another pilot bit. He pushed too hard in a climb, trying to cut across her vector. She rolled, slid behind him, and his systems blared. Raptor 5 guns dead? The silence that followed was heavier than before. 3 down, 2 remained. Reynolds' voice cut in, harsher now, tinged with anger. Stay with me. We can. Still boxer. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. The box had shattered. Valkyrie wasn't prey anymore. She was the hunter. The 2 remaining Raptors pulled close, their contrails weaving together in desperate defense. They stopped chasing kills and started surviving. Every maneuver was tighter, sharper, but more cautious. Their confidence had evaporated. Valkyrie's voice came again, calm and surgical. "Engage or disengage, Captain. Your choice." It wasn't taunting. It was a test. Reynolds felt the weight of her words. Engage and risk his squadron collapsing entirely. Disengage and admit defeat. Neither option tasted right. On the deck, Harris leaned forward, hands behind his back. The younger lieutenant finally understood no one had bet against her. She wasn't fighting 5 jets. She was dismantling 5 egos. The youngest pilot, watching from afar after his simulated death, swallowed hard. His chest still burned from the shame of being first down, but as he saw her dance through the sky, part of him felt awe. He realized why the stories lived on. It wasn't luck. It wasn't exaggeration. It was inevitability. Valkyrie banked again, her jet framed against the burning sun, her voice echoing in the headsets of every surviving pilot. "This is Valkyrie. Who's next?" The Raptors didn't answer. The sky had become a graveyard of contrails. The Raptors' once pristine formation was broken, their arrogance stripped, their numbers cut down. 5 had entered. Now only 2 remained. The survivors clung to each other, flying tight, desperate to find safety in proximity. But the weight of silence pressed heavier than the air thinned at altitude. Valkyrie rode above them. Her jet glinted against the sun, contrails cutting sharp lines that seemed less like vapor and more like scars. She wasn't rushing the kill. She was circling, calculating, patient as a hawk watching the last 2 mice in the field. Every second of delay pressed harder against their nerves. On the carrier below, the deck crew stood frozen, eyes lifted. What had started as spectacle was now something else: lesson, legend, theater. The younger sailors muttered disbelief under their breaths. The veterans simply nodded. In the bridge, Commander Harris never looked away from the horizon. The younger lieutenant finally spoke, voice edged with awe. She's tearing them apart." Harris's reply was quiet, almost reverent. "She hasn't even finished yet." Above, Captain Reynolds gritted his teeth. Sweat beaded under his helmet, dripping into his eyes. He blinked it away, forcing his grip steady on the stick. His wingman, Lieutenant Parker, younger but still experienced, flew close on his flank. "Captain," Parker said, voice tight, "she's toying with us, picking us off one by one." Reynolds breathed hard through his mask. "Stay calm. Stay disciplined. 2 against 1. We still have the numbers. We can beat her." But even as he said it, he felt the hollowness in his words. Valkyrie wasn't just flying against them. She was inside their heads. Every hesitation, every extra beat of thought, every twitch of second-guessing, it belonged to her now. She spoke again, voice smooth and cold as steel. "Captain Reynolds." "Lieutenant Parker, it's your turn." Their blood chilled. Hearing her say their names over the combs stripped away whatever walls they had left. She wasn't talking to enemies. She was talking to students, and the sky was her classroom. Reynolds forced his voice steady. "Don't give her space. Tighten. Up, we stay together." The 2 Raptors rolled in unison, engines screaming, wings slicing the air as they tried to box her. This time, they moved carefully, cautiously, no longer charging recklessly. They meant to trap her, force her hand. Valkyrie dove. The suddenness of her move shocked them. She cut across their formation like lightning, her fuselage screaming. With speed, the Raptors chased, rolling into a steep dive. Air pressed hard against their bodies, G-forces clawing at their ribs, but they stayed on her tail. For a moment, hope surged. They had her pinned in the dive. Fox 3. Parker arced, loosing a simulated missile. The computers confirmed lock. A shrill tone rang in his headset. Kill. Relief surged through his veins. But the relief shattered in seconds. Valkyrie's jet vanished below the cloud deck. They followed, breaking through mist, eyes straining for visual contact. And then she was gone. Radar screens flickered, signatures scrambled. For 2 long, panicked seconds, neither Raptor pilot could see her. Where is she?" Parker stammered. Reynolds scanned frantically. His gut twisted with realization before his eyes confirmed it. He jerked his stick, craning upward. "Check high!" Too late. Valkyrie erupted from above, slicing out. Of the sun with predatory precision. She had looped the dive, forcing them deeper into the clouds while she circled back overhead. Her cannons lit up the simulation. Raptor 3 guns dead. Parker's cockpit blinked red. His headset screamed the verdict. His body sagged against the straps, disbelief crushing his chest. "Damn it," he snarled, peeling away in frustration, but the exercise had already judged him. He was gone. Now it was won. Only Captain Reynolds remained. The horizon felt endless and suffocating at the same time. His wingmen gone, his squadron shattered, Reynolds was alone against the legend. He steadied his breathing, forcing down the weight of panic. His jet was still the most advanced fighter in the sky. He had trained for years, led dozens of men. He couldn't fold now. Valkyrie's voice cut in, calm and merciless. "Captain, last man standing." Reynolds tightened his grip on the stick until his knuckles ached. He knew she wasn't just reminding him. She was cornering him. Alone, he couldn't lean on formation, couldn't hide in numbers. It was him versus her. And she thrived in one-on-one skies. On the carrier deck, the tension was unbearable. The sailors shouted, some cheering. For the captain to hold his ground, others whispering about Valkyrie's inevitable victory. In the bridge, Harris stood perfectly still, watching with the sharpness of memory. Can he beat her? The younger lieutenant whispered. Harris shook his head. He can survive her, if he's smart. Above, Reynolds dove hard, cutting across the horizon. Valkyrie followed, but not close, never close. She let him run, let him burn fuel and energy, her presence looming just far enough behind to suffocate without striking. It was psychological warfare as much as aerial combat. Reynolds' heart hammered. Every maneuver he made, she mirrored with casual ease. He cut left, she cut left. He climbed, she climbed smoother. He rolled, her roll was tighter, cleaner. Finally, he snapped. He pulled into a high G barrel roll, forcing his body against the straps, pain screaming across his ribs. His vision darkened at the edges, blood pulling from his head. He grit his teeth, holding the turn. When his jet leveled, he searched frantically. For one glorious second, he thought he'd shaken her. His radar was clear. His canopy showed only endless sky, and his warning system blared. She was behind him. The kill tone screamed in his headset. Raptor 1 guns. Dead. Valkyrie's voice was flat, surgical. Reynolds slumped back in his seat, sweat pouring down his face. His hands trembled against the controls. He'd fought with everything he had, but she dismantled him as easily as the rest. Above the Pacific, Valkyrie leveled her jet, engines roaring steady. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. Her silence was sharper than any victory cry. On the carrier, sailors erupted cheers, disbelief, awe. The radar screen glowed red. All 5 Raptors marked as kills. The younger lieutenant stared, mouth open, unable to process what he had seen. She beat them all. Harris exhaled, finally allowing himself to relax. His eyes softened with something like pride. She always does. Valkyrie's voice returned, soft but firm, carried across the combs for every pilot and every ear on the carrier to hear. Exercise complete. 5 Raptors down. The sky fell silent. A sky seemed to exhale. Contrails twisted and thinned, sunlight glinting off a Pacific sea, suddenly calm in contrast to the violence that had unfolded above. Valkyrie's jet streaked toward the carrier, engines humming with the quiet authority of a predator returning home. The exercise was over. Every pilot had been tested, and every lesson had been learned in brutal clarity. Below, the carrier deck was a whirl of motion, though it was slower, careful, as if the sailors themselves sensed the weight of what had just transpired. Those who had watched Valkyrie dismantle 5 Raptors with a calm smile now moved with awe, almost reverence. Conversations were sparse. Words felt inadequate. Even the veterans, hardened by decades at sea, leaned over railings, eyes wide, silently counting the impossible sequence of victories. She did it, muttered a petty officer under his breath, voice rough with disbelief. 5 down, every one of them. Younger sailors whispered, their jaws slack. I can't believe what I just saw. And somewhere in the hangar, a crew chief wiped sweat and oil from his hands, shaking his head. It's like she doesn't even fight the same way as the rest of us. It's something else. Commander Harris remained on the bridge, arms crossed, watching Valkyrie's jet descend toward the landing area. His face betrayed no surprise. He had seen this before, in exercises, in memories, in reports, but witnessing it unfold in real time carried a different weight. The younger lieutenant beside him fidgeted nervously. She annihilated them all, the lieutenant stammered. Harris's lips curved faintly. Not annihilated, outclassed. In time, you'll understand the difference. Skill like that doesn't need aggression. It doesn't need force. It just exists. Valkyrie's jet leveled, aligning with the carrier deck with precision that seemed almost impossible. The landing gear touched down with barely a shudder, catapulting her forward just enough to absorb the deck's motion, and she rolled to a stop as if guided by instinct rather than calculation. Steam hissed, engines groaned, and the carrier seemed to collectively exhale. The deck crew moved quickly, but their hands trembled slightly. Valkyrie emerged from the cockpit, helmet tucked under one arm, flight suit dusty from the maneuvers, but otherwise pristine. She didn't look around for applause. She didn't even glance at the faces frozen in awe on the deck. She walked with calm authority, the same presence she had wielded in the sky. When she reached the edge of the deck, the crew chief approached, saluted, and handed her a folded checklist. She took it without a word, nodding slightly. Good flight, ma'am, he said softly. Valkyrie's reply was a simple nod, almost a shrug. Good exercise. The words carried the weight of understatement. 5 Raptors had been downed. 5 elite pilots had been humbled. And yet, she said only this. Sailors whispered amongst themselves. The younger ones stared, unable to comprehend what they had witnessed. The veterans, however, understood instantly. She was living legend made real. She had arrived as a story, a name whispered in reverence, and now she had returned to prove that legends never fade, they evolve. Commander Harris watched her walk across the deck, stepping lightly despite the steel beneath her boots. His younger lieutenant finally spoke again, voice shaking. Sir, she's incredible. How is it even possible? Harris didn't answer immediately. He let his eyes follow her, memorizing the weight of her presence, the calm that seemed to bend the carrier around her. Because, he said finally, she doesn't just fly a jet. She owns the air. The rest, they just tried to survive it. Meanwhile, in the ready rooms and control stations, the Raptors pilots were silent, processing their defeat. Even the most confident, most arrogant of them could not deny what had occurred. Each replay on simulators, each debrief, showed the same truth. Valkyrie had orchestrated every movement with precision, patience and strategy beyond what machines or technology could compensate for. It was instinct honed to perfection, talent fused with experience and confidence that did not waver. The youngest pilot, still trembling from his simulated loss, stared at the carrier from the deck edge. I don't even know what to say. I've trained my whole life. And she just... A veteran beside him clapped him gently on the shoulder. Kid, don't say anything. Just remember what you saw. That's how a master moves. And someday, if you're lucky, you'll learn to fly like that. Valkyrie didn't look at anyone as she walked back toward the hangar. Her jet stood silently behind her, the contrails and burn marks of the battle fading under the bright sunlight. Yet the aura she carried remained. It didn't need embellishment. The call sign itself, Valkyrie, had spoken louder than words. Louder than engines, louder than any boast. On the bridge, Harris exhaled deeply, feeling the tension leave the air. She came back to remind everyone why the stories exist, he murmured. Not because she needs to, but because the air remembers. A younger lieutenant swallowed, still wide-eyed. Sir, do you think she'll ever retire for good? Harris shook his head slowly. I don't think legends retire. They just wait for the right moment to remind the world who they are. Below on the deck, the crew prepared to service Valkyrie's jet, but no one dared rush her. She moved deliberately, inspecting her aircraft with the same meticulous calm she had in the air. Every switch, every panel, every hatch was methodically checked. No panic, no rush, no flaw. She was both part of the machine and apart from it. As the sun began to dip lower, casting golden streaks across the carrier, the sailors finally allowed themselves to breathe, some laughing nervously, others clapping quietly. The younger ones approached cautiously, asking questions, hoping for a glimpse into the mind of someone who had just done the impossible. Valkyrie answered little, mostly gestures, small nods, and instructions. Her presence was enough to convey what words could not. Each nod carried the authority of experience. Each glance, the precision of instinct honed over decades. The call sign Valkyrie was more than a name now. It was a warning, a memory, a standard against which all future pilots would be measured. 5 Raptors, elite pilots all, had learned what every legend eventually teaches. Skill, patience, and intuition cannot be outgunned or outpaced. And with that, Valkyrie walked off the deck, the Pacific wind tugging at her flight suit, the sunset glinting across her visor, leaving behind not just a trail of contrails, but a trail of awe that would linger long after she disappeared from sight. The carrier was alive again with noise, engines humming, sailors moving to reset for the next exercise. But the atmosphere had changed. The story of the day would not be told in simple reports. It would be whispered in mess halls, repeated in ready rooms, and carried in the memory of every pilot who had witnessed it. The lesson was simple, though it could not be summed in words. Legends do not need to scream to dominate. They do not need to boast. One call sign, one presence, one mind perfectly tuned to the rhythm of the air was enough. And the sky had remembered.